If I was to show you this photo right here and actually ask you the question, which camera do you think shot this photo? Out of the brand new Google Pixel 9 XL or my professional Sony stills camera? Let's actually put the two shots side by side. So the shot on the left here is shot on camera A, the shot on the right hand camera is camera B. So straight away I want you guys to test yourselves. Drop a comment down below with which camera you think is which out of the two. I absolutely love doing these comparisons with the Google Pixel cameras because this almost is the perfect comparison. You have all of the hardware here, the kind of really super powerful bits of hardware, an absolute beast of a camera. This is the Sony a7 IV and the variety of lenses that I'm using in this video. And then you have the software power of the Pixel 9. And really the story of the Pixel 9 this year is all about the software smarts, and the camera is no different. So revealing that shot, it was camera B that was the Google Pixel 9 Pro, and camera A was actually the Sony a7 IV. Let me know how many of you guys got that one correct, and let's jump into more comparisons. All right, so here we have a bunch of image comparisons. I'm just going to do them one after the other, starting with a Pixel image and then a Sony image. I'll have the focal ranges marked down, and these are all JPEGs. The only thing that was in auto mode on the Sony was the white balance, so there are obviously some white balance differences, which is kind of interesting to see. But like I said, I will note whether there's a telephoto or a main lens shot, and these are all the 12 megapixel standard JPEGs, and we will edit some RAWs in a second here. I think, to be honest, the Pixel is actually performing really well. Certainly on the telephoto, the thing that is just most obvious is the depth. You can see the depth of field roll-off being the most significant thing, and I think this image here is probably the most interesting of the lot because it perfectly illustrates the dynamic range between these two camera systems. Obviously in a RAW file, obviously this is a JPEG, but in a RAW file from the Sony, you get a decent amount of dynamic range. On the Pixel, you get an absurd amount of dynamic range. Just look at how bright his hoodie is here, and you can see decent exposure on his skin, even in the shade as well. So things are just really interesting, whereas on the Sony, it's just a lot more natural. It's handled like a normal camera. The shadows are just darker, and the highlights are, you know, within a normal range. So that's the JPEGs. What about when we actually take some of these RAWs into Adobe Lightroom and compare those side by side? All right, so we're in Adobe Lightroom here. I've got a couple of images. First of all is the Sony image here, and you can see the before and after of this edit that I've done. I mean, I've really accentuated the blues, as you can see if we go down to this blue section here. I'm going to pull those some of that saturation back just a little bit, but you can clearly see the type of thing you're able to achieve using a RAW file. I'm mainly doing this for illustrative purposes. If I wanted to edit this properly, I'd probably do this a little bit differently, but you can see this is the Pixel image for the comparative scene. That is the before and after, so this is what it looks like before, and you can see that it kind of just shooting RAW does fix a lot of the issues with the Google Pixel images, in my opinion. One small little tip would be that when you are working with these files inside Adobe Lightroom is to go and change the way the profile works. Sometimes you want to change around with a different profile potentially. You can see that I normally stick to the Google Pixel profile being around 50 or so. This one here is a Pixel image, and you can see again, same thing. If we zoom right in, that is actually a really nice image. This one's taken with the telephoto, the 5x telephoto, and like I say, like that could come, apart from maybe the slight background blur, like maybe probably an optical lens would have a little bit more background blur at this level of compression of shot. But you can see that the actual skin tones, the kind of texture on Basil's skin here, it's actually really, really nice coming from a smartphone. And you can clearly see the same sort of thing. This is what I meant. I actually think that the Pixels handled the light a little bit better as well. Don't get me wrong, I think when you are to kind of zoom and punch in, you can clearly see that the skin is really nice on the professional camera. And like I said about the background blur here, you can clearly see the differences there. But on the whole, I think with a nice subtle edit, this is the before. I actually just pulled mainly the exposure down. I didn't really even mess with the colors on this one because I thought it was looking super nice. And I've left the pixel correction up, but actually even pulling that down to around the 60 mark looks really, really nice in my opinion. All right, so something I do just want to talk about briefly is the kind of shutter performance. And these cameras, a professional camera is built for speed, right? So if you listen closely to the camera right now, let's just take a little shot here of Basil. You can see how quick that shutter is working. Those are raw files each and every time. Like, these are built for speed and performance. Whereas on the Pixel, you can see here, like I'm taking a shot. These are the 50 megapixel mode. If you drop to 12 megapixel shots, the performance will be better. But actually trying to take high megapixel resolution photos in kind of like a fast way with the Pixel, basically kind of impossible. So that's obviously the JPEGs and the RAWs covered, but something we haven't talked about is the full 50 megapixel modes that are available on the Google Pixel 9 Pro. The ultra wide on the Pixel 9 Pro has now been upgraded, so you actually have a 50 megapixel sensor in all of these lenses now, the ultra wide, the main rear facing lens, and the telephoto. So let's compare the full resolution of these cameras to the A7 IV. We'll keep this relatively simple, and we'll actually use digital cropping to kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So this is an 120 roughly % zoom, and then we'll zoom right into 500%, and we'll do that on both cameras so you can actually see the level of detail in all of these shots. So similar thing, this is the Pixel image now at roughly 130%, and then here is 500% zoom on the 50 megapixel shot. So let's do one more. This is 120%. Here is 500, and then moving on to the Pixel, here is 120%, and then here is the 500. So hopefully that will give you guys a good idea just roughly on how much detail is in these images, and obviously there's an absolute ton on the Pixel. So we've obviously tested some photos in a slightly wider orientation just to kind of give you guys an idea of what the photos look like from a stepped back positioning. What about something which traditionally a more professional camera system would be a bit stronger at, something like a portrait shot? So here's some portrait mode shots for comparison side by side. I wouldn't read too much into the colors and the exposure on the Sony. On this one, I was kind of just mainly focusing on the zooms, and obviously you could edit those in the RAWs if you needed. This is always my issue with portrait mode. I've zoomed in here so you can see the difference in Basil's hair. As you can see, shooting someone with a hair in a style like Basil's in these photos, you're just always going to have issues with portrait mode. Some phones might get this closer, but in my experience, you're just always going to have issues. This is an interesting shot here because there's a real significant difference in dynamic range. This is just a Pixel story through and through, to be honest, is that the Pixel wants everything to have a certain level of exposure. You can see that the true camera just wants the shadows in the image to be closer to truer black. Of course, one massive advantage, and this is something we've talked about throughout this video, but this is software versus hardware. And one really cool feature this year is called Add Me. So basically what this allows you to do is take a photo in a group situation where you maybe don't have somebody around you to actually take that photo. And what this allows you to do is take a photo without you in, hand your phone over to the person you're shooting with, and then allow them to essentially like comp you in. It will show almost like a little hover, and you're able to basically line the shot up. And I actually think this does look fantastic. Jury's out for sure on whether I would actually use this all the time, because I do think it's going to be one of those things which is a little bit gimmicky. Obviously some people are going to love this, and probably it's going to be like part of everyday life for them, but for the most part I would say that this is not going to be useful on a day-to-day basis, but it is one of those features that when you need it, it's extremely useful. And I actually don't think this would be the easiest thing in the world to Photoshop. You'd have to have pretty good Photoshopping skills unless you're kind of very good at keeping the camera in exactly the same spot. And again, let's take this camera right here. You could absolutely achieve this using this camera, but like I said, you would probably need a tripod. You wouldn't be able to just hand it over to your friend and have them take the same photo. And then of course, you would actually have to spend a lot of time on Photoshop comping those two photos together, whereas the Pixel is doing this almost instantly for you. It gives you like a before and after, both of those photos, and a comped version. And it's even doing things like working out the shadows for you. Like, this is really impressive to have this available on your phone instantly, and it's almost like the perfect example as to what these systems represent. The Pixel is all about ease, speed, and kind of just efficiency and fun, whereas the obviously a professional camera is just that, it's a professional tool. Right, so what we're going to test now is we're going to test some fast action, almost like shutter speed stuff, because that's obviously where a more professional camera comes in clutch over a smartphone. And shutter speed performance, and as we know on these phones, are not always perfect. So we'll test some burst mode shots, and we'll take some standard kind of mode shots as well here. But I am going to lie basically about here. I'm going to lie about here, and Basil up there is going to jump over me, and we'll see what we can get, hey? So here are the Pixel images. I actually think the Pixel did extremely well with this. I used Top Shot to select the best images. I throw in an ultra wide as well, but there's no kind of blurring or anything like that. And here are the Sony images. And like I said, I actually think the Pixel performed fantastically in this particular test because smartphones are not always the best at capturing motion, and we won't name names about which brands that is. Something I obviously do think is massively important to mention when we're talking about comparing a smartphone over a more professional camera system is, of course, one of the main advantages. Obviously, smartphones over the years have been dramatically developed. We now have a range of lenses. We can go from an ultra wide through to a 5x telephoto on this camera, and that is so cool that we have access to that in our pockets. But one of the main advantages with another camera system is that we can swap out the lenses. I can take my 100 to 400, this is a Sony G Master lens, pretty expensive lens, I'm not gonna lie to you. So I wanted to test the telephoto of the Pixel 9 Pro XL against this 100 to 400. And obviously we've compared portrait mode shots already, so what we're gonna talk about now is actually this new feature called Zoom Enhance. And basically what this allows you to do is this allows you to zoom into a photo up to 30 times. So as you can see, I'm doing this right here, and we will compare this to a professional shot in just a little bit later. But basically you zoom right in and then you tap into the edit sections, you tap Zoom Enhance, and basically what this does is it will be using generative AI to essentially work out and give you better detail. It's actually fairly similar to what Samsung are doing on their phones with the 100X. Like you have that moment where it zooms in, snaps a photo, and then it massively processes. It's sort of doing a similar thing here. It's working out what that image is and trying to sort of zoom and rebuild it slightly to give you a more pleasing result. Unfortunately though, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is just absolutely not fantastic. It certainly needs work. This is not working right now. Obviously, this is only a test in one particular situation, but when you compare it to, like I say, a more professional photo, this is what, probably 400 millimeters of zoom, and this is a true optical performance. And as you can see, things are just like drastically better. Of course, it's not a like for like comparison. I didn't take a photo and then zoom in 30 times, but this is just one of those examples where actually you can't replace proper camera hardware in certain instances. And I think these photos are a perfect illustration actually of what's going on here, because when you take shots on the Google Pixel 9 Pro, if we take a shot that is wide, right, there's not a lot of difference here, especially when we're talking about the JPEGs out of the cameras. You're actually getting a ton of dynamic range in a pixel photo, and when you're working with a shot where there wouldn't be a ton of kind of natural depth, i.e. you're not wanting to get a ton of depth, shallow depth of field in that image, that's one of the biggest giveaways of a kind of a slightly cheaper camera system. And it's something which, because of the sensor size in these smartphones now, it just cannot be replicated using a smartphone. If you take this shot here, you can just see the level of depth of field that we're getting on the device, and it's just something that can't always be faked with portrait mode. So we've covered off photos, and now we have to talk about video. And there's one particular aspect I do want to focus on, and that is video stabilization. All right, so the stabilization test, as we did, first of all, let's talk about the color correction, because when you shoot with a more high-end camera, you can shoot in what's called a log profile. So that's this right here, and you can see that here's my color grade on top. So this is an example, right, of stabilization standard. So there's a very slight bit of stabilization, obviously on a super uneven floor here, but this I think does a very good job of illustrating the differences. Let's switch over to the Pixel video here, and the Pixel video, like, I think overall is standing up really well. Colors aren't quite as poppy, I don't think, but you could obviously, you know, boost some saturation if you wanted to do that. But again, I think this is a very good representation. This is why I wanted to cover the stabilization, because most of the time when you're shooting video casually, you obviously want really good stabilization on your phone, and I think the Pixel's got a lot better in this regard. Still on the same very uneven flooring. This is the standard stabilization mode on the Pixel, and now we will switch to active mode on the camera. Let's see how different this is. Again, still on the same kind of uneven floor, but you can see that the performance is a little bit better. It's a little bit more jerky, I would say, but actually at least the kind of image is a little bit more kind of locked on and a little bit at least easier to watch. But then if we go to the active mode on the Pixel, you can see that this really is almost like having a gimbal in your pocket. This does go down to 1080p, so it's no longer 4K, but again, like, this is really pretty insane stabilization, I have to admit. Like I said, you could shoot some kind of like gimbal-esque videos using nothing but the active stabilization mode on the Pixel. Hey guys, I've cut the audio off the start of this clip because I basically did a bit of an audio test between these two cameras, just to kind of give you guys an idea of the audio differences between the two. The wind noise was actually a little bit higher than I was originally expecting, but I still wanted to include it in the comparison so you could actually see the differences between the two microphones, and also it's an additional image shot with some kind of interesting dynamic range on my face. So the fact that you can just shoot pretty like decent high-end video now with a smartphone like you're getting straight out of the camera like this, these speech enhancement is on right now. There's quite a bit of wind around. I'm going to bet that it actually sounds pretty decent. But we will switch over now to the Sony just to give you a comparison. Okay, so here is the Sony now. So first of all, we're getting probably a bit of a dynamic range test. I've got this cap on, there's probably some mixed shadows on my face, and I'm willing to bet that the Pixel handles that quite differently to the Sony camera. And then of course we have the audio, which is also what I mentioned before. There's a lot of post-processing going on with the Pixel audio, but I bet that does actually sound better. Whereas the Sony, it's straight out of camera. You can make some of those enhancements yourself, but really the scratch audio, the audio that's actually recorded internally to the camera, is really just recorded as a reference. Most of the time you'll be working with a more professional audio system. And I mentioned it right at the start of the video, like I love testing the Pixel every single year because like I say, it's almost like the polar opposite of a professional camera system for me. It's all about the software. It's all about just having fun and creating some cool images using this camera system. The Pixel almost doesn't seem to be taking itself super seriously with those high dynamic range and pixel look. It's not going to trying to be the best photography experience that you can possibly get on a smartphone. It just wants to capture really fantastic, great images every single time when you take a shot, and it wants to do that easily and quick. And that basically is the polar opposite of a traditional camera system, where actually you need to really know your settings, and chances are you're going to have to bring that image home, process it a lot until it actually gets you a look that's even comparable to a Pixel 9 Pro.